People who try in all the wrong places to find meaning and fulfillment in life and find their lives and hearts crushed. And then, as this woman that we heard about came to Christ and realized that was where true life was found, and she poured out her love for Him in worship at His feet. That's really an example of what we're seeing in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're on a journey with Solomon, and I invite your attention to the book of Ecclesiastes this morning. We have traveled with him in our last stop in Ecclesiastes into the halls of academia. And we have gone into the library and sat at the study carrel, and we have pored over the books to find out if the pursuit of knowledge really will give us the kind of fulfillment, peace, meaning in life, and purpose in life that it sometimes promises. And we have seen that that is not the case. That as good as education is, as wonderful as the pursuit of knowledge is, it does not meet the deepest need of the soul. It does not give purpose, meaning, fulfillment, and meet that deep longing that is within our hearts. So let's change gears. Let's trade all of that in, and we're going to trade it in for a $30,000 Ricci suit, $200 Ricci tie, $38,000 Testoni shoes. We're going to trade it in for $1,250 titanium aviator sunglasses like Brad Pitt wears. We're going to hop in our $1,600,000 Lamborghini Renaventon, which there are only 20 of them made. One of them you see on the screen. And we're going to get in the fast lane today. We're going to take a drive down the road of living for pleasure and living for material possessions. And we're going to see what that will do for us. That's exactly what Solomon does in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. He throws caution to the winds. He decides that he will live the good life. He decides that he will experiment. He will do a carefully controlled experiment with, if it feels good, do it. You only go around once. And so let's try pleasure. Let's try everything that will make me feel good, and let's try everything money will buy. We'll see if that really develops the kind of peace and meaning and fulfillment that it promises. I love the way David Hubbard, in his commentary on Ecclesiastes, introduces this section. He says, after all, part of pleasure's lure is that it offers to heighten our senses. We are created to enjoy a tender touch, a tasty morsel, a tangy beverage, a graceful figure, a delicate perfume. From the standpoint of our senses, we might conclude that pleasure is what we were made for. The preacher, Solomon, sought to test that view of life by abandoning himself to pleasure. He gave his senses every chance to thrill and tingle, to stir and soothe. Would he uncover life's purpose by arousing his sensitivities? He thought it worth a try. And so he does. He decides to throw off the restraints, kick down the fences, just leave his inhibitions behind, and go where pleasure might lead him. Go wherever his desires might take him. And to live the good life, to get all that he can get out of this life. Solomon turned his attention to the good life. And that is the message that our culture screams at us today. If you will get all you can get, and if you will pour yourself into enjoying all the pleasures you can find, then that is where life really is. Solomon tries that. And he has enough resources to make it happen. He can live out the ultimate fantasy in his life because he's got what it takes. He has almost a limitless supply of money. The nation is at peace. There is no war. And so it's time to kind of kick back and just enjoy. Just enjoy life. Whatever is pleasurable, whatever is fun, whatever I can accumulate, that's what I'm going to do, Solomon says. Will you please listen to him today? Will you please hear what he has to say? Because Solomon is going to tell us, I tried everything and more than you could even dream about. So especially those of you who are young, teenagers, 20-somethings, Those of you entering the workplace, beginning to have earning power, setting your sights on what you want in life, will you please listen to what Solomon says? Will you please understand that he's been down that road to the degree that you will never experience? And he's here to tell us today there is a bad side to the good life. I want to warn you, Solomon says, about the bad side of the good life. And if you will listen to him, you will save yourself years of heartache in running down the wrong paths to find fulfillment and meaning in life. Let's see what Solomon says about the bad side of the good life. He spends most of this passage, the first 11 verses of chapter 2, describing the good life. So let's begin there with his description of the good life. There are three ingredients that he tells us about and describes in laying out for us what the good life involves. First of all, Solomon says it involves entertainment. Look at what he says in verse 1. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? He's already anticipating the result, his conclusion, which he will develop later in verses 10 and 11. But he's already anticipating where this is going to lead him. Solomon tried all that you could do with entertainment. Let's take a closer look at what he says, and so we get a grasp for exactly what he's going to do. He said to himself, come now, I will test you. The word test is a word which means really a controlled experiment. He's conducting an experiment. He's not just dabbling in pleasure. This shows resolve. I am going to conduct a well-conceived experiment in what pleasure can provide. So I'm going to test. What's he going to test? I'm going to test you, speaking to himself, I'm going to test you with pleasure. Now the word for pleasure is used two ways in the book of Ecclesiastes. Sometimes Solomon uses it of legitimate pleasures, which Solomon will affirm are good. But at other times, Solomon uses this word of self-indulgent pleasures, of the kind of pleasure that revolves around frivolous fun that's designed to satisfy your sinful desires. In other words, whatever I really want, even if it crosses the boundary lines and goes into the area of sinful desire, whatever I really want, that's what I'm going to test. That's what I'm going to experiment with. Sinful pleasure. Why is he going to do that? Well, he says, I'm going to experiment with sinful pleasure to find out. Interesting word. It's a word which literally means to discover for myself. In other words, I'm not going to take what anybody else says. I'm not going to listen to what other people warn me about. And this is so often the mindset of so many people. I don't care what mom and dad say. I don't care what my grandparents have said. I don't care what my friends say. I'm going to find out for myself. I want to sow my wild oats. I want to do what I want to do. I'm going to find out for myself. That's exactly the meaning of that word. So Solomon says, we're going to conduct this experiment with sinful pleasure so that I can find out for myself what? Well, he says, what is good? Now, the word for good here is a word which literally means worthwhile or of any real value. We've seen a similar word with the word gain before in chapter 1. What he's going to do is he's going to pour himself into this experiment and then find out what the results are. What really is left over? What can I really find worthwhile of real value from this? Again, the pursuit here, the goal is to find ultimate purpose, meaning, satisfaction in life. To find something that will quench the thirst of my soul and will fill the emptiness in my soul. That's what he's looking for. And then he talks about laughter in verse 2. Part of this experiment is going to include laughter. That's the first aspect of it, entertainment. Again, the word is used 4 different ways in the Old Testament, but in the book of Ecclesiastes, the word laughter is always used of frivolous laughter. It's always used of merrymaking, partying, fun-loving, banqueting, drinking fun. That's the kind of laughter that Solomon's talking about. So, what you see here is Solomon is going to immerse himself in a world of entertainment. He's going to rock the pleasure out of the palace. He's going to fill his palace with all the laughter and the good times that he can possibly have. And the palace is going to vibrate with hilarity, with court jesters, with entertainers, with musicians, with banquets. And Solomon did it to the hilt. There is historical verification of this in the book of 1 Kings, the kind of lifestyle that Solomon lived in this frivolity and banqueting and fun. In 1 Kings chapter 4, just listen as I read these verses, 1 Kings 4 verse 20. The people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They ate, they drank, and they were happy. Verse 21 says, And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all his life, which indicates the kingdom had expanded its borders to the greatest expanse of land that the Israelite kingdom ever had in the Old Testament. They were at peace, they were prosperous, everything was going great. Solomon had other nations even under his control. But now listen to this. Verse 22 says, Solomon's daily provisions, daily provisions were 30 cores of the finest flour. 30 cores is about 5.5 tons of flour every day. That's a lot of bread. 5.5 tons. But that's not all. And 60 cores of meal. 11 tons of meal he went through every day. That's not all. 10 head of stall-fed cattle, 20 of pasture-fed cattle. He went through 30 cows a day. And 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. That's a lot of food. Scholars estimate it would take 30 to 40,000 people to consume that much food every day. You talk about banqueting. You talk about living it to the hilt in the palace. Solomon knows what he's talking about. The entertainment, the gestures, the laughter, the fun that would go along with it. Entertainment's big business today. Comedians, musicians, movies, TV programs, amusement parks. We entertain ourselves to death. We pay our entertainers more than we pay anybody else. Why? What are we looking for? What are we in such a mad pursuit of? Is it some way to quiet the voices within us that are crying out for meaning and purpose? I would say that's exactly what it is. And if we can soothe those voices or quiet them down so that we don't hear them for a while, put a Band-Aid on them, medicate them with entertainment, we'll do it. And although we may not do it to the extent that Solomon had available to him, we still try to do the same thing. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not attacking good humor, laughter, fun. That's a necessary part of a balanced life, and it's a good thing. But parties and sitcoms can never fill the deepest need of your soul. They cannot fill the deepest longings and the cry of your heart for some real meaning and purpose in life. Chuck Swindoll tells the story of a man who had developed such a depression that he decided to go to a psychiatrist and try to find out what was going on, what was wrong with him, how he could get over this. And so he spilled out his story to this psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist listened and took some notes. And finally he said, I think you just need some laughter. I think you need to get out and have a good time and just forget about your troubles and try to laugh some, and that will be good for you. He said, tell you what, there is a new comedian in town that I read about in the newspaper, and you ought to go buy a ticket to his show, go see his show, just have fun, just have a good time, and that will help you feel better. The guy dropped his head and said, I am that comedian. So you see, entertainment does not satisfy the deepest need of the soul. But we're still trying what Solomon tried with entertainment. Well, that's only the first ingredient of the good life, entertainment. The second ingredient is external stimulation. In verse 3, Solomon tried this too. He said, I tried cheering myself with wine. Again, the word tried is the idea of testing or exploring. This is a controlled experiment now. And the way he says it is very interesting. He said, I'm going to experiment with cheering myself with wine. I lived 10 years in North Carolina. Some of the best soda available in this country is cheer wine. And when I read this, I thought of that. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the real stuff. But he says it in a very interesting way. I'm going to cheer myself with wine. Again, this is a controlled experiment. He's testing, he's exploring. What he's exploring is what alcohol will do to me. I want to find out how it will make me feel. I want to find out how much it takes to give me a certain level of excitement or a buzz. I want to find out then where I go from there and how much it takes to kind of get me to the next level. I'm going to control this, but I'm going to experiment with this. That's the way it always starts. So I'm going to cheer myself with wine. Then notice what he says. And embracing folly. The word embrace literally means to grasp hold of, and folly is a lifestyle that Solomon will eventually recognize is foolish. But he's going to grab it for all he can get. He's going to grab all the gusto he can get, to use the lingo of a famous beer commercial. Solomon is doing the same thing that the culture screams at us to do today. Stimulate yourself with something that will make you feel good. So Solomon says, I'm going to try that. I'm going to do that. Now notice his next expression in verse 3. He says, my mind's still guiding me with wisdom. What he's saying, again, is this is a carefully controlled experiment. Please don't get the wrong idea here. Don't think of Solomon as a drunk that's stumbling into a rescue mission somewhere. Or even someone who's so depressed he just decides to get bombed and forget it all. No. Solomon says, I'm going to keep my senses, in the sense that he says, this is a controlled experiment. I'm going to experiment with external stimulation to find out how much it takes. But Solomon will find out, as everyone finds out, that what begins that way does not end there. So many fall into the same trap today. Whether it's alcohol, marijuana, pills, cocaine. I'm just going to experiment to see what it's like. I know people have told me I shouldn't drink this or I shouldn't take that. But I want to find out for myself. That's exactly what Solomon says. I'm not going to listen to what anybody else says. I'm going to find out for myself how it makes me feel. That's how it starts. But that's never how it ends. Because external stimulation of the kind that Solomon's talking about gets its clutches in you. It gets its claws in you. And before you realize what's happened, you are in bondage. There's no meaning and fulfillment in that. What promises fulfillment delivers exactly the opposite. And that's why Solomon's going to say the end result of all this when he gets to chapter or verse 11. The end result of this was I was empty. It was meaningless. It left me emptied. And that's where it will always take you. And by the way, it's not just alcohol and drugs and those kinds of things. The same thing can happen with pornography. The same thing can happen with gambling. The same thing can happen to some extent with food. Anything that you allow to get its clutches in you and become an addictive, compulsive behavior, you will find the same thing. It will get hold of you to the extent that it will begin to control your life. And when it is in the driver's seat, it will run you over the cliff. That's what Solomon would find. Again, Swindoll, in his excellent book on Ecclesiastes, talks about listening to a radio talk show. Several well-known professional athletes were talking about their struggles with drug abuse. And they talked about how they got started. One of them said, "What kept me going back to it was that warm feeling down the back of my neck that helped me go to sleep every night. Frankly, it felt marvelous." Another one admitted, "When you do drugs, you open doors inside you that nothing else can open. It's spectacular. It's indescribable. With the pressure I'm under and the money I'm making and the public that's after me and the job I've got to keep up at this level, I've got to have a little Coke. I've got to have a few drugs. It helps me get going. It helps me slow down. It'll put me in the right frame of mind so I can do my thing because I'm great." Isn't that sad? Both of those men started that way. Both of them ended up losing everything they had. You see, that's how it leaves you. That's where it takes you. Any of those compulsive behaviors that I mentioned earlier will take you down that same road. Please listen to Solomon. Don't do the same thing he did. Don't say, "I'm going to try this for myself. I don't care what you say. I don't care what the Bible says. I don't care what anybody else says. I'm going to find out for myself." What folly! You want to feel like, you want to feel what it feels like to be hit by a truck? I don't care what anybody else has told me. I don't care what I've seen of people who end up getting hit by a truck. I want to see what it feels like for myself. What foolishness! Please listen to Solomon. The good life, entertainment, external stimulation. But look at this. Now you talk about the good life. Look at the next ingredient. Possessions. Stuff. Things. And again, Solomon knows what he's talking about. He had more than anyone in this room has, all of us put together, or ever will have. We'll see in a moment. Notice what he says. Verse 4. "I undertook great projects." And he's going to list them. At least 7 areas of possessions that Solomon's going to list. The first one is houses. You see it there in verse 4. "I built houses for myself." Notice the plural, houses. If you go back to 1 Kings chapter 4, you will find the description of his houses. 1 Kings 9 and 10 describe his houses. He built a palace. It took 13 years to build. That's twice as much time as it took to build the temple. The temple was one of the wonders of the ancient world. Solomon's temple was. It took him twice as long to build his palace. That was some house. But that's not the only house he had. The Bible also says in 1 Kings he built another palace in the forest of Lebanon. And he built a third palace for one of his wives, who was the daughter of Pharaoh in Egypt. And then he built at least 3 others that had great halls in them. And he built 6 cities to store his stuff. Yeah, he had houses. Plural. Many of them. Notice what else he says. Not only houses, projects. Let's just call them that. He says that in verse 4. "I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards." Verse 5. "I made gardens." The word is literally orchards. So these are fruit orchards. And he says parks. "I made parks." The word that's used there for parks, the original word is a word which was used in the ancient world for the exclusive secret parks of Oriental kings. Babylon had them. Assyria had them. The Medo-Persian Empire had them. Solomon had them. They were secret parks built just for the pleasure of the king. Whole parks just for me. Yeah, he had projects, all right. Verse 6. Or verse 5, it says he planted all kinds of fruit trees in these parks. And then verse 6, "I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees." You can still see those reservoirs today. They're called Solomon's pools. There are 3 of them just south of Jerusalem. Here's what they look like. This is a picture of 2 of them. It's hard to get them all in one picture unless you get really up high. The one you're looking at there is the one that's almost 2 football fields in length, over 580 feet long. pools of water with intricate delivery systems through water channels into the city of Jerusalem to water all of his forests, his parks, his trees. This guy had it. You talk about projects, engineering projects, building projects. He had it. He did it. You say, well, that doesn't sound like me. Well, you've got projects, maybe not on that scale, but your collections, the things that you collect, your house may be your project, your yard may be your project, your garden may be your project, your sewing stuff may be your project, your woodworking may be your project, your gun collection may be your project, whatever it is. You got projects, things that you pour time and energy into that bring you some degree of satisfaction, right? Solomon had projects. Houses, projects. He also had what I'm going to call conveniences. He would call them servants. Verse 7. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. He had household servants to do everything for him. You do too. No, I don't. Yes, you do. You don't call them slaves. You don't call them servants. We call them conveniences. We call them appliances. We call them that kind of stuff. But you have them. You've got the washer and the dryer. Now, I know that some of these conveniences may promote more work than help you with work. But can you imagine, ladies, and any gentlemen that may venture into this, doing wash the old-fashioned way? Some of you in here may remember the washboard. I don't remember that, but I've heard my mother talk about it and how she washed cloth diapers when 4 of us were still in diapers. First 4 of us born in 5 years. And she washed cloth diapers on a washboard. Did not have a washing machine. Some of you can remember those days. You want to go back to that? The good old days? No, you've got washers, you've got dryers, you've got refrigerator, stove, a microwave, a dishwasher, a chainsaw. You got a laptop, a GPS, a smartphone, a tablet. Yeah, we got all kinds of servants, all kinds of conveniences. Does that satisfy? Well, it's all part of the package that Solomon's talking about. Notice, fourthly, he talks about his assets. He's got assets. In verse 7, middle of the verse, I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. The way you measured wealth in biblical times was how many herds and flocks you had. Flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle. How many flocks do you have? How many animals do you have? And that was your portfolio. Okay, today it would be our real estate and our houses and cars and boats and motorcycles and bank and accounts and investments. But all of that wrapped into assets in his day would be herds and flocks. And he says, I got a bunch of them. More than anyone else before me. So he's got plenty of assets. But notice he's also got money. Verse 8, I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. Treasure of kings and provinces. Solomon actually redesigned the kingdom of Israel into provinces and began to tax them heavily. But he also brought tribute from other surrounding nations that were under his control. So he had all kinds of money coming in. Lots of cash flow. Big, huge cash flow. Again, I'm not going to take the time to look back at this, but it's an interesting read. So I would encourage you to do it sometime. Jot it down. 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 14 to 29 tell us about Solomon's tremendous cash flow. Let me just give you some of the basics. Every year, he had $612 million in gold coming in alone. That didn't count all the other precious metals or all the other trading he was doing. $612 million a year he made just in gold. Take everything else, he was pulling in well over $1 billion a year. That's in today's terms, today's money. But well over $1 billion a year. You can put him on a scale with anybody in the world today, pretty much. And that's the kind of money he was making. That text also says that he built some large gold shields. I forget how many of them there were, but there were a bunch of them Each of them cost $245,000. And then he made some smaller shields. Each of them cost over $60,000. Those were just for display in his court. The guy had money. More money than you and I will ever see or even think about. All kinds of money. But not only did he have money, he loved music, and he had plenty of it. Look at verse 8. I acquired male and female singers. Didn't have the sound systems in that day, so he just brought the singers in. You know, he got the people who were cutting the records, if they'd been living in our day, and he brought them in. He had them there in the palace, and they were singing maybe some of his 1,000-plus songs that he wrote. He had the entertainment right there in the palace, all the singers he could want. And then, seventh, he had erotic pleasure. Look at verse 8. The end of the verse says, and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. You may have a note beside a little number or letter beside the word harem with a note, as I have in my Bible, that says the meaning of the Hebrew for this phrase is uncertain. And it is an unusual Hebrew word. It only occurs once in the Old Testament, so we don't have any basis of comparison with how it's used in other places. It's a word that some people say means musical instruments, but there's no indication that that's true. Most scholars believe it comes from the root word comes from the Hebrew word for breast. And thus what Solomon is saying is, I had women available to me to delight me with erotic pleasure whenever I wanted. The Bible tells us in the book of 1 Kings that he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, women that were just available to him anytime he wanted them. 1,000. You see, this man explored to the very depths what it meant to be satisfied with erotic pleasure. He lived out the playboy philosophy. You say, well, I certainly don't have that. Well, I hope not. I sure hope not. But the reality of the fact is, that same thing is available to anybody today through the Internet. Unlimited erotic pleasure through pornography. And ladies, I'm not just talking to the men. For weeks now, the USA Today best-selling book, the top 3, have been the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy, which are, from what I read, I haven't read the books, but the reviews I've read of them, highly sensual novels. I don't think men are reading those. Women are reading them. What pornography is to a man, romance novels are to a woman. And it basically does the same thing. Okay? So the same erotic pleasure is available in the same quantity today as was available to Solomon. And there are millions and millions of people who think that's where I can find some kind of fulfillment in my life. Well, Solomon summarizes all of this maddening grasp for meaning and fulfillment in verse 9. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this my wisdom stayed with me. You say, oh really? After what we read? Solomon's not saying that everything he did was wise. What he was saying was this was a carefully controlled experiment. At least that's how it started. I was experimenting with all these things in a carefully conceived and carried out plan to find out what would happen. Where I would find real meaning. And so verse 10, he says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. That's the summary of Solomon's maddening pursuit in the realm of pleasure and possessions as to what would bring him fulfillment in life. And you know what he concluded? We can't stop without seeing his evaluation of the good life. Oh, he's described the good life in a way that Donald Trump would be proud of. By the way, Donald Trump, in his book, Trump, Surviving at the Top, says this. He says, my attention span is short, And probably my least favorite thing to do is to maintain the status quo. Instead of being content when everything is going fine, I start getting impatient and irritable. And notice this next statement that Donald Trump made. For me, the important thing is the getting, not the having. Whoa, what a telling statement. How true that is with anyone who goes down this road. Ultimately, where it brings you is the important thing is not the having, but the getting. The getting. And Solomon's going to come to that very same conclusion. Notice his evaluation of the good life in verse 10. Middle of the verse. After describing all of this, he says, my heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. The first thing that we must admit and be realistic about is the fact that all of this brings momentary pleasure. It really does. It's fun. You'll laugh a lot. You'll have a great time for a little while. So Solomon says, yeah, it was fun. My heart took delight in all this. This was the reward of all my toil. I worked hard and I got it. It was fun. But he doesn't stop there. He continues in verse 11. There's not only momentary pleasure, there's also no lasting fulfillment. No lasting fulfillment. Verse 11 says, yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was, here's our word again, meaningless. A chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Okay, here's where I really want you to listen to Solomon. Because Solomon's going to tell us, you live out your pleasures to whatever extent. Go headlong, kick out the fences and just indulge yourself. No boundaries. You do that, I've done it, and it will leave you empty. That's where it will take you. Pour your life into possessions. And again, possessions in and of themselves are not wrong. They can be wonderful blessings of God to be used for His glory. But pour your life into possessions for possession's sake, and I'll tell you where it will leave you. Empty, meaningless, chasing after the wind, nothing really to grab onto. Nothing was gained. It's a word we've seen before in chapter 1. Bottom line is there's really nothing left over. There's nothing there. Solomon anticipates that back in verses 1 and 2. Look at what he says there. Verse 1, he says, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good, but that also proved to be meaningless. The word proved is the key word. The word proved is actually the Hebrew word, behold, look. And so he's inviting us right up front to enter into the surprise of what he's going to find with all of this stuff. This is what I found. Look with me. Here it is. Here's the proof. It was meaningless. And verse 2, laughter, I said, is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? There's no lasting fulfillment. When you really consider it and think through it and you get to the end of it all, it did not provide the purpose in life, the meaning, the fulfillment that I thought it would. That's what Solomon is saying. I love again the way David Hubbard summarizes this. He says it this way. Living for pleasure has another snare. And here's the reason why what Solomon tried in this chapter will not work. Here's the reason. Pleasure satisfies only during the act. Repetition is the key to pleasure. And we can all identify with this. One drink, one sexual fling, one contest won at the gambling place, one project accomplished, one wild party. None of these, nor all of them put together, can be enough to bring satisfaction. The quest for pleasure is like eating, and I love this analogy, it's like eating salted peanuts. It is impossible to stop after the first bite. One bite leads to another because the first one leaves no lasting impact. Now listen to the way he phrases this. To reflect on the delights of the first peanut is far less gratifying than to reach for the second. Far from comforting us, each act of pleasure leaves us thirsty for the next. One of the wealthy celebrities in our country has said that. I read you the quote just a moment ago. Donald Trump said that. For me, the important thing is the getting, not the having. And so when you have it, you think it's going to satisfy and give you real purpose and meaning in life, and all it does is create a thirst to have more, to get more, to get more. Whether it's pleasure or possessions, it sinks its claws in you, and it puts you in bondage with a thirst that must have more. That's the way it works. Solomon is just one of many living examples of that. And here's the reason why. Bottom line, here's the reason why pleasure and possessions will never give you ultimate meaning and satisfaction and fulfillment in life. God created you to have a relationship with Him. You were created for that. Man was created to live in relationship with God, His Father. Adam sinned and trashed that in the garden. And when Adam did that, everyone born from Adam since that time is born with a hole, with no relationship with God, far from God. The relationship is cut off from the moment you're born. You inherited that from Adam. And therefore, there is a missing element in your life. A missing element that some people try to fill with pleasure, thinking, that will make me feel better. That will give me some purpose and meaning in life. That will answer the question, isn't there more than this? Some people try to fill it with possessions. But the missing dimension of your life cannot be filled by anything except a relationship with God. Because that's what you were created for. And that hole in your soul, that emptiness deep down that you feel and you try to fill it with other things, that emptiness is the hole in your soul that can only be filled by a relationship with God. Now, Solomon will go on to say that later in this chapter and several other times throughout the book. And he will also say that once you come to God to find the relationship with Him that will give you true meaning and purpose in life, then all the other pieces of the puzzle fit together too. You can find legitimate pleasure and legitimate enjoyment of possessions that God gives you, but only if the hole in your soul is already filled and you're not looking to those things to fill them. Relationship with God. And we know that the Bible teaches there's only one way to have that, and that is through His Son, Jesus Christ. God sent His Son to take care of the problem that created that hole in the first place. Adam sinned, broke the relationship with God, thus creating the hole in our soul. We're all born with it. God sent Jesus, His Son, to pay for our sin so that we might be brought back into relationship with God and find the only true meaning and purpose for which we were put on this planet. That is a relationship with God. Then everything else begins to fall into place. But it is only when you come to Jesus Christ as your Savior and you realize that His death on the cross has paid for your sins so that you can be reunited with God and have a relationship with Him again. It's only when you do that that you will find the ultimate purpose and meaning of life. Solomon's saying, I've done it. I tried it. I explored it. I went through a carefully designed experiment to find out where it would take me. And when I got done with all the pleasure I could get and with all the possessions I could get, I was empty. Empty. And you will be too. Let's pray together. Father, I pray that we would all here this morning take a deep look into our hearts to see what we're trying to fill that hole with. And if there's anyone here this morning who is trying to fill that hole with other things other than you, maybe pleasure, maybe possessions, I pray that they would recognize today, as they may even feel it this morning, they're empty. It's like chasing the wind. There's nothing to really grab onto. I pray, Father, that you would help them to come to Christ today. I ask, Father, that everyone in this room, we would all examine our hearts to make sure that we know Jesus as our Savior, and we've come to the cross to find true meaning and fulfillment in life. It's in Jesus' name we ask it. Amen.